Hey there. You know, it was only a few weeks ago when Bigme released a massive update for their Kaleido 3 screen devices. And this is probably one of the biggest updates. Well, it is, I think, the biggest update we've seen related to Kaleido 3. Although that's a pretty short window, to be fair. But a lot of the work that they did in that update on fixing ghosting was incredible. Well, now they've just released a follow-up update. And so this video will be going over what those changes are and asking the question, did they hit it out of the park again? Can it be 2 times in a row? We'll find out. Now, before we go into the details, let me go ahead and put on the screen the details of the update. And we're not going to go over all of these in this video. We're going to go over the more significant ones. But we are going to give I think, a really good sense of what are the major changes that happen to the device and what I think about those changes. So, given that, let's take a look. Okay, let's take a look at some of these changes in action. And we'll start here with the home screen. I like to have what's called the office style home screen, which is not just the apps, but it also has this sidebar. And this sidebar is where they have a slight change. Now, this bar itself is for the most part the same in that you can custom select what you have in the bar, and then when you have too many items that can fit on the screen, then you can scroll to get to those other items, like so. But now they've added this down and up arrow that jumps from either the beginning or the end of the list. So if I click on this, it jumps to there, notes on top, and if I click on this, it jumps down to storage, which I have at the end. So a small change, but I think that's a nice addition, and it's a welcome change to the system. The next thing I want to highlight is the front lighting, and here they've made quite a few changes to this part of the system tray. Now, previous to this, there were 2 sliding bars, just like you see now, for warm and cold lighting, but there were 2 buttons. There's a warm light and a cold light, and actually it had those icons right there. They saved the icons for the new system, but these buttons worked very differently. So if I went ahead and turned on my warm lighting like so and my cold lighting like so, and this is what I liked, in order to turn off the front lighting, I would either have to bring each bar back down to 0, or I would have to click on the 2 buttons, the warm button and the cold button. So what they've done now, and this is an improvement, is they've turned that into 1 button, which is called Lights Out. So if I click on that, all the front lighting comes off in 1 touch. So that's a nice addition. The other button is basically whatever the sliding configuration was last set by the user. So if I click on this, it will return to what I had set to last. Any type of change I make to these sliding bars, like so, is what other will go back to when I click on that button again. In between these 2 buttons are some presets, which I have mixed feelings about. The daytime one has no warm lighting, but just a little bit of cold lighting. I don't know if this was ever practical to be used even in dark settings. That's just not very much front lighting. The night mode's a bit better. No warm lighting, but almost halfway on the cold lighting scale. That is something I actually do use from time to time, so this is something I could find myself using. And then what they call bedding, which presumably means reading before you go to bed. If you click on that, it's a combination of a little bit of warm light and a little bit more of cold light. So you've got some presets there, but most importantly is the lights out and the returning to whatever the user-defined settings were. That's the big change here. And I think overall that's a positive change. So far, it's looking pretty good. Let's go into the note-taking app. And we'll open up a file. And here there are some changes. I don't think there's any changes to the actual functionality of the app, but they have changed the look of the app and the menus on the app. So you'll notice there used to be a pen tray up above. That pen tray is gone. They've put it into the toolbar, so we'll look at that in a second. And one of the reasons why they did that was I think they wanted to simplify this to make the page numbering and buttons bigger, and probably more importantly, to make the notebook name bigger. So this is a larger font than before, and it's more space to put the name of the notebook. So that was the predominant impetus for this change. And as far as that goes, I'm pretty good with that. I think that's a positive change. The thing that unfortunately I think is a bit of a step backwards is that this upper part of the toolbar, which is basically your pen tray plus your eraser, which again used to be up here, I don't like it over here to the side. Now I can move this anywhere on the screen, but it's always going to be this vertical formation. I could even hide it, but I like having my pen tray exposed. So for me, this is just basically blocking some of the canvas where the canvas hadn't been blocked before. So I actually think that overall, I'm kind of disappointed in this particular change because at least for my workflow, I just really liked having, I liked having, I'm going to click black, I'll write something. Okay, now I want to highlight it. I'll click and highlight or erase, although I could use the buttons for the eraser. It seemed more convenient before. Previous to this change, the toolbar was essentially these items listed here, plus some of the items that are up here in terms of how you share files, and there's a few things in this more category that used to reside in the toolbar. I would have preferred they get rid of at least those two things, put them in the toolbar, and put the pen tray up here. And even if you had to get rid of undo and redo and put that in there to make room for the toolbar, I think that would have been better. So I'm a little disappointed. I'm also disappointed, again, their custom templates are awful. And here it is. I mean, you can see it right there for yourself. This is supposed to be a uniformed lined piece of paper. And instead you've got light lines, dark lines, light lines, dark lines, etc. Not a good look. They didn't do anything to fix the templates. Now, I'll remind folks from my previous videos, you can import your own templates as PDFs, which is great, and that actually solves for this problem. So if I click on templates, this is one that I've imported. And you can see this one came from daisypaper.com, but look how nice it looks. Perfectly uniform. You've got that nice little red line going there. It's a really nice lined paper. So the good news, right, is that you can solve for this template problem by bringing your own templates, but this kind of exposes how bad their templates are and how it's really kind of inexcusable. Now, this is not new to this update. That template scenario has always been true since I've owned this device. It's just disappointing that they worked to make the UI a little bit better and a little bit worse, but didn't address the most important thing with their note-taking app, which were those templates. So Notes, I would say, is a step backwards. Not a tremendous step backwards. I don't want to overstate this. And if you don't mind having your pen tray over the canvas like this, then this would be much less of an issue for you. But for me, it wasn't worth it. I would have rather have gone back to the old style, all in all. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Okay, so the next thing we'll look at is the Eink Center, and there were a number of changes here. So let's take a look at that. So if I go into the Eink Center, this is what the menu now looks like. It's not a tremendous departure from what we saw before, but functionally there are some notable differences. Now, my memory may not be serving me, but I believe that previously the ordering of these different modes, these 5 different refresh modes, was a little different. I think Regal was placed at the end, and now they've moved it over to here. Now, that may seem like a very small change, and because it is, but I do like that because, to be frank, these 3 refresh modes are essentially the same in my opinion. I can't tell the difference, or I can only tell the difference if I look really hard. So I'm agnostic to whether I pick any of these 3. And in a similar fashion, I feel the same way between these 2. So I feel like there's essentially 2 different refresh modes. So for them to group them together is, I think, pretty valid. And it's a minor change, but one that I appreciate. And by the way, books is the similar, in my opinion, so it's not specific to Bigme. I wish these companies would simplify their selections because I think they're a little bit artificial and they add to complexity when it's not necessary. But that's a rant for another time. Now, the full refresh frequency bar is the same, and by the way, one of the features I really like about the Bigme system, but it's not different, so I won't dwell on that. But what is new is this bar that says color mode, and these presets affect the 3 bars below. Now, these 3 bars are not new. What is new, however, is that with the advent of these presets, for some reason, and it's noted here, they've deactivated them for normal and extreme modes. So it used to be that dark enhancement, for example, would work pretty much the same no matter what mode you picked. And now it only works for these modes. It doesn't work for these modes. I find that to be odd. I'm not quite sure what the thought process is there. I feel like that's a step backwards. But again, I don't think it's a huge step backwards. But dark enhancement in particular is one of those sliders that I actually use in all my apps. I usually like a dark enhancement around 10, and sometimes I'll go up to 20. And I don't have that option anymore for these 2 modes, which I tend to want to use. So that is a little bit of a disappointment. The modes do continue to work for HD 256, HD and Regal, and therefore all these presets works for that as well. So we're going to go ahead and see that in action, and we'll focus in particular on the 2 areas that they wanted to focus on, which is magazine and comics. Let's start with comics. Okay, perfect. We're in cell by cell mode, which is great. Let's go ahead and check our modes. Okay, before we see this in action, let me kind of quickly go over what these presets look like. Default and magazine, at least in the cases that I've looked, have always been the same. And they have dark enhancement around 30, vivid around 70, and color brightness at 0. So you'll see when I click on magazine, like so, it doesn't change. But when you click on comic, it does. And so the dark enhancement goes up and the vivid enhancement goes all the way. And custom is whatever you set it as. So if I go, for example, here to magazine and say, no, I want more dark enhancement, then that becomes your custom setting. And if I switch back to magazine, I go back to custom. Unlike the case with the front lighting, it does not default to how you set it last. So this behaves a little bit differently, and I think I prefer the front lighting. I'm not sure why they chose to apply this differently in this mode as opposed to how they did it on the system tray for front lighting. I don't like this, but regardless, that's how that works. Okay, so we're in comics, so let's go ahead and click on comics. And we're going to start, I'll just start with Regal, that's fine. And let's go ahead and go through, we'll go ahead and refresh the screen. Like so. And let's go ahead and advance the page. So what you're noticing as I advance from cell to cell is a few things. First off, notice it takes just a hair over 2 seconds to go from one cell to the next. So 1001, 1002, 1001, 1002, like so. You'll also notice it's a little bit choppy as it goes from cell to cell. Let's take a look at that. Okay. What it's doing is it's doing a full refresh of the screen. That's what's causing a little bit of the flashing. But the value of that is you're getting no ghosting whatsoever. The image is perfect. No ghosting in the black bars nor in the image. And also the coloring and some of the detailing of the image in these modes are really nice and optimized. So for contrast, if we go down and we'll put it on extreme mode. You notice immediately that the image got lighter. Let's take a look at that again. So focus up here in this bar. I'm going to go to HD this time. Okay, darker, a little more colorful. Let's go back to extreme. Okay, and the navigation's different as well. So I'm going to go ahead and advance the screen. See, it's a smoother navigation this time. There's no flashing of the screen. And now we're also introducing some ghosting, although it's not too evident yet. And this is reflective of the last update to the system that Bigme did, which was incredible. And so we're kind of seeing that in action here, where there's some I'm not actually even picking up any ghosting. Maybe a little bit, and maybe a little bit over here. There's definitely ghosting. Ghosting is not eliminated in this mode. You can see a little bit in the black bars. They just did an incredible job of muting it. So yes, there's ghosting, but it's ghosting that can be ignored. It doesn't, for the most part, take away from the viewing experience. That's how great their last update was. So let's go back. Let me go back a few cells here. Like so. Okay. And then let's look at HD 256, for example. Again, a much nicer image. It's a darker image. The colors are seeming to pop just a little bit more. No ghosting whatsoever. But as you go from screen to screen, you're getting a little flashes, a little slower too. So when we were going from cell to cell previously in extreme or normal mode, it was taking about a second. Here it's taking about 2 seconds. So twice as long. But that's not to say it's a long time. It's fairly acceptable. And I think with comics, where I ultimately land with this, is I actually like this implementation. I think that it's a little more, you do lose some stuff in terms of the speediness of going from cell to cell, in terms of losing the animations from going to cell. But the trade-off is the images look really good and they feel more optimized than is the case with the other modes. And so the new update from Bigme for comics, I think, is an overall positive for those reasons. Now let's see if we still feel that way, or we feel the same way rather, with magazines. So we'll go into Flipster. Flipster is a bit of a temperamental magazine. So hopefully we'll be able to have a good demonstration here. So we are going to the Eink Center, and actually let's start with we'll start with normal mode. Okay, and then let's look at the animation. So if I swipe the page, yeah, you've got a nice little animation there, pretty snappy. Okay, now you can't read this text because it's too small of a screen, so I need to expand on that. Let me double tap, which is how this app works, when it works. There we go. And now I'm going to have to now watch the graphics as I got to pinch and zoom a little bit here. And move it around. Okay, not too bad. Pretty smooth. Oops, pretty easy to work with. It is a little bit of a temperamental app. I think that's the app more than it is app and user error than it is the system. But this is pretty smooth. Okay, but lighter on the colors. Can't do anything to increase dark enhancement now because that's been shut off, right? So let's go ahead and go into, we'll go into Regal. Okay, much darker because the dark enhancement comes up. Let's go ahead and refresh the screen here. Great. Let's swipe. Okay, ooh, not so good. A little choppy there on the page turns, right? Yeah, okay. Now, let's see what it's like to zoom in on the text, which we have to do in order to be able to read this. There we go. Very choppy. We'll do, see that? Oops, it's too much. And you can see I think it's unacceptable. And to be, I guess fair is not the right term, but HD and the related modes are performing on the magazine app pretty much the same way it performed before the update. So this was a similar experience. This is not new. But and so back then I basically said that the best way to read the magazines is to use a normal or extreme mode. The images don't look not as nice, but the trade-off isn't worth it. In comics, the trade-off is worth it. You get the nice images, and you're not as concerned about animations moving from cell to cell, etc. Here, it's more jarring, and you're mostly reading text. So I don't think that these new modes, this magazine mode, actually is an effective mode because it's tied to a refresh mode that I think is, my personal opinion, is unacceptable. I just would not read a magazine using those modes, and the new mode is irrelevant. It's been shut off for the two modes that I would use. This is a step backwards. A step backwards because previously I could have used the modes I wanted and I could have used dark enhancement. So that's my take there. Let's take a look at Google News as our last option. And let's see what we are at in terms. Okay, so we're in normal mode or extreme mode. Doesn't matter. They're about the same. Good mode, you get nice scrolling. The images maybe aren't quite as dark or as detailed, but they're more than acceptable. You know exactly what you're looking at, and they're still colorful, relatively speaking. Let's now go to we'll look at HD, and we're on magazines, probably most appropriate, I suppose. Images become a little bit darker because of that dark enhancement slider. Ooh, look at that choppiness. Not a fan. I think that really does take away from the experience. And again, what you get from the images is not worth what you're giving up in terms of choppiness. So my personal assessment is that the new system change, the Eink Center, visually intense applications like comics, where you really notice the improvements in the coloring and the quality of the image when you go to a regal mode or an HD mode. These changes are helpful in that context, but most apps, in my experience, work better in extreme mode or normal mode. And in that case, the changes are actually worse because you don't have the ability for dark enhancement. So that's my 2 cents on that particular change. So that is the major features of the update and what it looks like, and I think it's pretty clear what I think about it. Obviously, they had this really fantastic update previously, and to expect a follow-up this quickly and to be as significant or as impactful was probably a stretch. But even having said that, even from the context of what is effectively a minor update, I can't help but think this one's a little bit of a disappointment. And for me personally, a couple areas that I think took a step back, having that pen tray as opposed to being on the top bar, and losing the ability to have dark enhancement in extreme and fast modes or normal modes. I just kind of prefer where the device was before this update than where it is afterwards. That's not to say that there aren't improvements, and I talked a little bit about those, and there's definitely some there. And it's not to say that the places where we went backwards, in my mind, are significant. This is not a terrible update. I wouldn't characterize it anything like that. But certainly in the context of what we had just previous, it feels like a letdown, and just kind of wish that they hadn't taken some things away that I thought were strengths of the device. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm hopeful that future updates will rectify that. Maybe even this feedback will help, although I have no idea where Bigme has any idea I exist. But that's my 2 cents on the matter, and hopefully you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.